Diana van Maasdijk join us. Jane is the president and CEO of Saturna Capital. So thank you, Jane, for joining us. Diana is joining us from Amsterdam. So we welcome her this evening. And for those that are on the eastern part of the world, more eastern part of the world, thank you for joining us. So we're glad to have this webinar. We've been working on this for quite a while. Diana's group, Equileap, came to our attention through some work she does, significant work on gender equality. Jane, who's our president and the CEO of Saturna Capital, is also the portfolio manager for the Sustainable Equity Fund. So welcome, Jane. Welcome, Diana. And thanks for joining us. Jane, and we started by showing some information about the Saturna Sustainable Equity Fund. So if you want to talk a little bit about your role in the firm and the strategy you run, and then we'll go into a little more about the work that Diana's group does with Equileap, which, as we learned along the way in this database, it's really powered by the research that her firm does. So welcome, Jane.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Jane Carten, CEO at Saturna Capital. I've been here for more than 20 years and have been running the Saturna Sustainable Equity Fund for about 4 years. We use both negative and positive screening. So we exclude certain sin-based companies in our portfolio building, but we also really make a concerted effort to include companies that are doing the right thing and that we see as leaders in their space. And part of that is looking at their diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just their policies, but also the makeup of their board of directors, their management, and their workforce. So when we saw the data that As You Sow had provided through the data that they got from Equileap, we weren't entirely surprised that we showed up as a gender equity leader, just because that's one of the things that we intentionally look at when we choose the underlying portfolio companies. We were happy to see it, and we are, of course, interested in investing in those companies, partly because we want to partner with the companies that are bringing the world forward in a progressive way, but also because we believe that those companies over time with that long-term outlook will outperform and our shareholders will benefit in terms of performance.
Yeah, and the genderequalityfunds.org database is a publicly available database. And as you said, Jane, our score didn't surprise us. It was in the 92nd percentile. And I think within funds that are intentional in terms of sustainability, I think your fund was the second. Here it's showing it's 89 out of 1,100 funds across all international equity funds. But I think, we were pleased to see both the overall gender equality score, but then that really highlighted the work that Diana's group was doing. So welcome, Diana, if you can give us a little more background on your firm and your role in the firm and the work that you're doing, which I think we're all very excited about.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. A little bit of the background. Actually, I'm relatively new to the financial industry. My background was always in women's rights and in gender equality. I worked for a very long time for nonprofits. And then I became a philanthropy advisor and started advising high net worth individuals on how to create their foundations and do their giving. And a bank, ABN AMRO here in Amsterdam, asked me to go work for them and to set up their philanthropy services. So I did that, and that's when I came in touch with sustainable investing, ESG investing, impact investing, whatever you want to call it. Realized that a lot of my clients weren't only giving money, but they were investing in a sustainable way. And I came up with the idea of, could we invest with a gender lens? If we wanted to choose the companies, could we find those companies doing best on gender equality? I called the person who was delivering the data, the sustainable data to the bank, and found out that they didn't have any data on gender diversity apart from the number of women on boards. And I wanted to do much more. I wanted to be able to choose companies based on whether they gave parental leave to men and women, whether they had anti-sexual harassment policies, whether they had a good balance of men and women at all levels of the company. And since that data was missing, I decided to create Equileap. So about 5 years ago, I founded Equileap. And today we analyze over 4,000 companies on gender equality.
I hadn't asked you this question before, but where did the name Equileap come in?
Yeah, we were trying, well, I wanted something that didn't include the word women, but that included equity or equality. And the whole idea is that we want to take a leap. We want to make this faster. And so we want to close the equality gap in the workplace. That's our mission. And we thought equity or equality and taking a leap, and that's how it came Equileap.
Okay, and so we now share with the group your mission and really your added value, which is to build a database. And I think one of the elements that Saturna has in the underpinnings, we're an active manager, and we've always worked on building our own proprietary screening process because we knew we really had to understand the data across the board. So I think our firms were mutually aligned in that aspect. Like you said, there really wasn't good data on pay inequality, and other than data about board membership, it was pretty high level. So then the next topic, a little bit about Equileap, was really where you focused on the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is not only a theme in what we've been doing, but on our most recent impact report, we actually highlighted the same thing. So maybe you go a little more background on what you're looking at there and some of the research that your firm has done, Diana.
Yeah, sure. So indeed, we wanted to align ourselves with SDG 5, which is to achieve gender equality. And we also looked at things like the Women's Empowerment Principles of the UN, looked at all the criteria, and that's how we came up with our gender equality scorecard, which includes 19 criteria and looks at things like what I mentioned, pay equality, pay equity, and the gender balance and all. And of course, we had a social mission to want to do this. But at the same time, I started looking back and seeing that there was a lot of research that pointed out that more gender diverse companies have better performance. And here in this sheet, you see 2 of the latest research that has been done on this. And I mean, there's a lot of it. There's mountains of research that point towards this. But some of the latest ones are this S&P research, which looked at after a female CEO was appointed, there was a 20% increase in the stock price. And the other one is from Glenmead, which is very interesting. They looked at the Russell 1000 from 2014 to 2020. And they ranked the companies based on the gender equality score of Equileap, and found out that the top 20% of these companies outperformed the bottom 20% by 3%. So here again, we have the business case that gender diversity isn't only good for society, but it's good for your wallet.
And Jane, you also find the same thing when you're looking at your holdings in terms of the diversity of the management and the board and within the firm. And I think you've done a lot of work at Saturna in order to advance equality within our firm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that not just in the companies we invest in, but also in the way that we run the firm, it's important to live those values, because I believe they're really better for all of us. And in doing so, we have managed to build a very gender equitable management team, workforce, and have changed our trustees on our Saturna Investment Trust to include equal women and men. And I think that is helpful to the trust, to the shareholders, and the industry. I think that very few trusts have been able to achieve that kind of equality, and I'm really proud that we're one of them.
And I think Jane and Diana both would say the same thing. There's an intentionality to what we're doing and then what companies are doing in terms of how that permeates gender equality and how it affects the overall leadership of the firm. And as Diana pointed out, there is research that really affects the performance of the funds. So Diana, your database covers globally over 4,000 companies in developed economies. Why don't you tell us a little more about the research you do and the depth of the research that you do at the firm level?
Yeah, so it's all done by hand. I have a team of researchers that go out there and look at these 4,000 companies and look at their websites, annual reports, corporate social responsibility reports, and gather information on this 19 criteria, which some of them are mentioned here on the sheet. We then once a year send an email to the companies and say, look, this is the information we have found on you, and is there anything that you would like to add? And if you do have that, we want them to publish it. It's really important for us to take only publicly available information. We don't want companies to just tick the box, but to actually say, you know, this is our gender pay gap. We have a gender pay gap, for example, of 5%, and to put it out there. And then when the companies have published that, we get the information. Now, if they have not published it, like for example, in the United States, only 5% of the companies publish their pay gap, the rest don't publish, we add then that this is not disclosed. This is also important information for the investors, the asset managers who license our data, who can then engage with companies and say, we would like you to start publishing this, or we see that you don't give any parental leave, paid parental leave to women or paid parental leave to men, and we want you to do that. So engagement and investor activism is a lot of the things that are done with our data. But also we see that people choose the best companies with the best scores, and then that's how they make actively managed portfolios or indices and the sort. And indeed, right now, we're just covering the developed economies, which means all of North America, most of Western Europe, and parts of Asia.
And Jane runs a global strategy, so she's looking into those exact same markets, some of which are fairly robust in the reporting and some of which aren't, I guess. Jane, do you find any differences in the various markets that you're looking at? Because I know you can limit yourself to up to 40% in any one market, but that gives you 60% outside of all those strategies too.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, different parts of the world are on different points of the spectrum when it comes to DEI and just progressive management techniques. For example, Japan is a very forward country. We think of them as being so technologically advanced, but with respect to gender equity, they are not nearly where, especially Europe and then the United States are. So there are few women participating in the workforce. They have been able to get their board numbers up to, I think, around 10%. Diana, I'm sure, knows exactly the number, but their management numbers are less. So it can be challenging to find companies in these locations that we absolutely want to participate in. And what we look for are companies that are making those changes, that understand why those changes are beneficial. And then what we see is if you can find the companies just as they're waking up and realizing these advantages, you can often participate in the outperformance as it's occurring. So we really do like to see when we can find companies that are on the beginning of their journey toward equity and inclusion, if they're not already there.
And I think, maybe in Diana's case, she can actually maybe has places where she's seen change, where the impact has come, particularly when you do year-over-year research with the companies. Yeah. The next we wanted to cover was really on gender balance globally, because I think this is an area where Saturna has had a really strong focus in terms of board diversity, for sure, and setting a sort of a high bar there in terms of women in leadership. Jane, if you want to comment on when you're looking at board and management diversity and some of the analysis we do.
Sure. So when we look at a company and we view their board of directors and we talk to their investor relations people and we are examining the fundamentals of the company, we certainly look at diversity of the board, not just actually through a gender lens, but also through a racial lens, a diversity of thought lens. I like to see companies that have people from all over on their board of directors from all over industries, and where they can really bring differences of thought, and potentially some friction can occur when making difficult decisions. And because really the point is to get the company out of groupthink and allow for innovation. And I think some of that friction is what makes that diversity of thought so useful.
Yeah, I think, and Diane, this is telling, and maybe this slide would be good if we had a 5-year change chart too, of how have things changed over the years since your firm's been doing this type of work.
Yeah, this is a sad looking chart indeed. Could be better, needs to become better. This is why we're doing this. We have seen positive change as far as the numbers. They are going up, but it just tells you that how bad they were, and we're not there yet. For sure, we see that the difference between, like Jane was saying, in Japan, of the executives and the board, it's just the same in almost every other country, especially because some countries have quotas. And therefore, when you look at this globally and you look at the 4,000 companies globally, you end up with a higher percentage of the board. But as you can see here, it's not even the 30%, which so many people have been talking about for the past 20 years. So we do see some improvement, but it's not enough, and we definitely need to see more.
Yeah, and then this is a deeper look into Saturna's strategy, because what we show here is both for the Sustainable Bond Fund, which we run, and the Sustainable Equity Fund, which Jane manages. If you compare 3 or more women on the board, the percentage is so much higher in our strategies versus the MSCI All World Index. And I think your data, Diane, is cut across the 4,000 firms, but we're really careful to pick those firms that have made a substantial move in that direction, either a 1/3 or more women on the board or 3 or more women. And I think we've been very intentional. And when you compare that to the broad market index, it's dramatically different. Jane, I think you in particular have done a good job of identifying those companies which have strong leadership and on a gender and like you said, even a racial diversity standpoint. Yeah. So I think, Jane, one of the things that you went to the fund board a few years ago, and we're talking about gender equality as a driving factor, and I think they pointed out to you that racial equality was just as important in terms of the diversity of the leadership.
Yeah, I think all kinds of diversity of thought are important, and can be beneficial when it comes to managing a business and making the products that are the most resonant in today's world. And I think it can only benefit people to get away from the people that might make you feel really comfortable, and bring in some people that are going to stretch your thinking. I'm interested to talk to you, Diana, about what you think the greatest challenges. I mean, obviously we have gender pay gap, which is first and foremost. But the one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately that I don't think I had paid enough attention to in the past is the idea of male, like, paternity leave. And yeah, you can offer paternity leave, but you also have to make an environment where it's safe to take paternity leave. And if you don't, then what's the outcome? If you're offering paternity leave, but people aren't taking it, men aren't taking it, then have you done any good? Or how do you make, how do you assess whether a company is making the real change and not just sort of greenwashing and saying, we have this paternity leave available? Do you have any insight on that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. And you were talking about Japan, right? Japan, by law, men have access to paternity leave. And they're well known for never taking it. because culturally, even though the law allows this, it's not allowed. And they were in the news a couple of months ago because a minister in their government took paternity leave, and was scandalous that he actually did. He actually said, well, I'm taking paternity leave. And that's what you need. You need to have men take paternity leave as well as you need women to take maternity leave. But many times women don't take it if they're afraid that their job won't be there when they come back, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, if nobody's taking paternity leave, it makes it it makes it even more difficult.
Right. It makes it
paternity leave.
And the numbers show up in the percentage of numbers at the senior management and the executives. I think that that's where we really have to keep our eye out for those numbers to see if those are changing. But indeed, a company could say, we don't allow sexual harassment, and then there's a toxic work environment. So it's really important to see, it's not enough to have the policies, I agree, but we have to start seeing the numbers show that. And I think one of the most important things that we have to see for sure is men taking paternity leave.
Have you seen anything in your studies that makes that easier, that makes it more likely that they're going to do that, so that it's not, I just worry that you offer it, they don't take it, and then it's a macho peer pressure thing where they're not taking it.
What I've seen that I've heard works is in the Scandinavian model, that when the men have access to it, that it's the couple, whether it's a heterosexual couple or a homosexual couple, the couple has access to so many leave. And if the one partner doesn't take it, the other one can't have it either. And so in that sense, you have to take it in order to really have the leave for both. And maybe that's one of the ways that that might work.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the items where, our firm has grown, and we have, now almost a different group of employees. And I think Jane's been pushing hard to encourage, this type of activity and in both the benefits, but making sure that it's part of the culture, no different. And one of you just mentioned, the Nordic countries or Sweden. Your group, Diana, does a really nice job on a country by country basis of really looking into things. And one of the reasons we like this slide is the US and Japan on the bottom right are just so far behind in terms of publishing gender pay gap information. And I'm surprised, being in the industry for almost 40 years, that this is still something that we're talking about. I mean, and that there's pay gaps in terms of just sharing that information. It actually surprises me. I don't know, Jane, where have you been doing?
I don't think it would surprise many women, to be honest. I think that sort of shows the difference, that you're surprised by it, and maybe that's unfair, but I'm not surprised that it's still a thing. We have a long way to go, and there are so many reasons why the pay gap exists, and so many barriers to really truly opening it up and putting it under the sunshine and saying, here's what we need to do in order to make this change. And yeah, it's so many reasons, from just the way that women advocate for themselves in the workplace, to old sort of ingrained thoughts that we have, implicit bias, essentially, that we have about helping men be the economic caretakers of their families, etc. So yeah, there's a long way for us to go with pay.
And some of the countries have, done, I guess, work in terms of regulating and requiring it. And, with Spain really being, and the UK being way ahead of some of the other governments and some of the other countries.
Yeah, I mean, despite the fact that, or despite the increasing participation in the workforce, women only earn 77% of what men earn globally. That's our global number. This is why I always say ESG investing must incorporate a gender lens, like in order to truly include and strengthen the social issues next to the environmental and governance issues. And this sheet here shows you how many companies, what percentage of the companies are publishing their gender pay information. And here you see that it's not the Nordics. Sweden, it's only 9%. It's not the North Americans. It's actually Spain, quite high. Italy and UK are the highest ones. And it's because they have legislation. In these countries, all have legislation saying that companies must calculate their pay gap that they have between the average pay they give to women in their company and the average pay to men. The UK says not only do you have to calculate it, you have to publish it. But all of these countries that you see higher numbers, even in Australia, even though it's not that high, 20%, they do have a report that they have, the Australian companies have to report to their governments, telling them if they are calculating the pay gap or not. And here you see the difference then with those countries that have a legislation and those who don't. And I think in the end, we've had a problem with the pay gap for a very, very long time, like Jane says. And so the only way we're going to change it is if there's legislation that forces companies to be transparent about it.
But Diana, we got a question in the chat that was directed to you. MSCI just released several gender data points, including workforce breakdown by gender, D&I targets linked to executive pay, et cetera. How is your data different from MSCI in terms of its gender data? Do you have any idea there?
I'd have to look if they just released exactly what they are. I know that they had pay data on the board. I would have to see exactly what they're doing on their, on their data on their board, but on their pay data, for example, I know that we're the only ones who look at the median pay gap, the mean pay gap in 3 bands, and a strategy to change. So we're very much focused only on gender equality. And we focus on 27 metrics across the 19 criteria. Anybody who wants to look at that can email me and we can share, a sample.
I'll move on to the next slide because there are a number of resources that we mentioned and we'll make sure that all those are available to everybody. We'll be able to send you copies of the slides. And I think, Diana's, website has a lot of nice reports in terms of gender equality. So I think there's a lot of good information there too. Saturna has published our impact report for a while. There's some nice information, particularly as we talk about those companies that have been strong in terms of SDG number 5. And I think we used the case study of AXA in that report also. So we can share that. We have our impact report. There's also an article that Jane, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about this, where you put the article back in March where you said we really need to start earlier with grooming women to become CEOs in the financial world. And I know you have some thoughts there.
Yeah, I absolutely think the pipeline is an important place to start, and that it is unfortunate that finance is still sort of a male-dominated field. I think it's such a fantastic place to be career-wise. We're so lucky to have important work that's interesting, and I would wish that for everyone's daughter and sister. And I think that if we can encourage women in a way that shows them from a young age that their voices are really important when it comes to financial decisions, we're going to be better off. And I do think that that's starting and that's happening more than it has in the future, but I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think you're doing some work, Jane, with the ICI and some other groups to really be a leader in terms of pushing that. And you've also done work in terms of adding to the PM staff at our own firm in terms of it. Our percentages are higher than the industry as a whole in terms of women in leadership and managing funds.
But we still, we have some wonderful female leaders in our executive team and on our board and in our portfolio management, but we could always use more. And I will say that when we have positions available, we get many fewer female applicants than male, just on a percentage basis, and we get many fewer people of color than we get white people, and we it's an interesting problem to try and sort out. And I think by the time that people are ready to apply for jobs, it's like a little too late. We need to go back to the education level and say, hey, these are wonderful careers and please consider them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, Diana, are you doing some of the work you're doing leading to career development in the firms that you're talking to? I think you're doing a nice job of carrying that message upstream within the companies. And have you seen an impact in terms of career development?
What we have seen is about 8 to 10% of the companies we contact actually want to engage with us. And they're asking us, what are you looking at? How can I increase my score? And we have good conversations with them where I think that the conversations we have with them on exactly, we're looking for a percentage of the workforce to be between 40 and 60% in order to give them the highest numbers, that we're looking for them, that they're giving parental leave to both men and women, that they've come back and said, oh, okay, we're going to take this into consideration. If they're actually doing it, I think it's too young. We're too young of a company to see that. But what I do see is that companies do care. Many companies do care, and they are trying to improve.
So we found each other through the genderequalityfunds.org database, which is put out by As You Sow, a West Coast-based firm. How did you start your relationship with As You Sow, and how did that develop?
That's a really good question. Andy Baer is the CEO there. Oh, I know how it happened. So we were licensing and selling our data in the United States. We're actually in Amsterdam, like you said, and we were working the US market and came into contact with someone who has a foundation called Ruth Shaver. And she said, you need to talk to As You Sow, because As You Sow does this sort of activism around different websites. And that's how we came into contact with them. And they told us about their dream to wanting to create a website where they could show the gender diversity and gender equality of all ETFs and mutual funds, and that they needed the data. So that's how we started licensing the data to them. Usually licensed to asset managers, but this is the first NGO that licensed from us.
Right, and we were introduced through a consulting firm on the West Coast that called us and said, your fund, Jane's fund ranks really high in terms of gender equality. And we said, thank you very much. What's your source? And then we were able to go back and look through that database and really understand it. And we were pleasantly surprised it was such a high ranking, but we really liked the underpinnings of the quality data. So we really appreciate that. And that was just something. So, we still have that resource listed on there. That's the genderequalityfunds.org database, which is actually a powerful tool. We just showed the one screen, but it actually is a nice tool for researching that. And advisors can use it to, showcase funds that they want to put in front of their clients.
You can look at any mutual fund, any ETF in the United States is up there.
So I included in there Diana's contact information. I think everybody on the call knows the folks at Saturna. We'll send copies of the slide to everybody. Jane and Diana, any other closing comments you want to have before we wrap it up today?
No, just thanks for being here. And Diana, it was fantastic to be able to spend some time together. And I hope you have a nice night in Amsterdam.
Yes, I'm ready for a glass of wine. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I look forward to doing more together.
Okay.
And anybody who wants to contact us, happy to connect. We also are quite active on LinkedIn. So see anybody who's interested.
Okay. And all of the resources that we did list are available. And if anybody needs anything, just let us know. And the copies of the slides will be sent out right away. So thank you, everyone, for joining our sustainable webinar. Thank you to Jane. Thank you to Diana. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. And we really appreciate the efforts that both of you do in terms of the way you manage your firms and the business and really take care of clients' investments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig, for putting it together.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Please consider an investment's objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. To obtain this and other important information about the Saturna Sustainable Funds and a current prospectus or summary prospectus, please visit saturnaSustainable.com or call toll-free 1-800-728-8762. Please read the prospectus or summary prospectus carefully before investing.